Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being the show, it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Undoing. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, a big focus of this episode is the trial itself. Obviously, there's a back and forth between Haley and the prosecutor, because the prosecutor's trying to lean into hey, he definitely did this. He hit her over and over again, well past the point that Eleanor was dead. Obviously, all the evidence points to him. He did this, basically. But Haley's defense, and this is the perspective she's going about this whole situation, because at first she's trying to get, because obviously, Jonathan screwed up by being why? Oh, you were walking around the same area, and even Grace was like, wait, what are you talking about? What are you even suggesting? Because it almost made it, he's like, no, I'm not saying anything. It's like, no, you're saying a lot. It's almost like you're trying to imply, I get it. He's like, oh, it's just a strange coincidence that you just happen to be near the place where the murder took place as well. And you're also, near my, the woman I'm having an affair with. But it was a situation where it was afterwards, Haley's telling them they have to hold hands and stuff because they got to present a united front, because their body language, their reactions to each other, to everything will make people, it's not just a breakdown on who Jonathan is, but also their marriage. So she has to present herself as someone that's by his side, so holding hands. And it's Haley was saying she didn't feel it, but when you're looking at Grace's face, you can tell she's a little heartbroken, because she is conflicted. You can tell that she does love him, and because obviously her dad kept being don't try and take him back. She's like, what? No, I'm not. But there is a part of her that kind of wants to, because despite everything, she does want to believe the best in him. She wants to believe that this is her husband, that despite everything, that she does still kind of love him. But Haley's throwing this whole thing, in the courtroom to be the cops had tunnel vision when it came to this case. It's her whole perspective that, they found Jonathan's semen there. It's because they were having an affair, and the fact is he found the body first and he ran away. Obviously she's not focusing on that too much, but it is a situation of the cops didn't bother looking for anything else. They got, because investigating any further in her mind, it's it would be acknowledging the fact is that they had a little bit of tunnel vision. So obviously, she kind of, that cop gets on the stand, she kind of turns the tables on him a little bit about obviously he was pissed. He's like, no, I heard your opening statement trying to suggest that hey, we didn't do our job. All we're doing is seeking the truth. And it's were there any other suspects in the area? And he was like, no. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I even thought that was interesting. I was like, well, we know Grace was in the area. You threw that in her face. And then Haley presents it to the court. It's oh, who's that? Oh, it's Grace. And it's oh, didn't you just say there were no other suspects? It's no. So, wait, are you saying that she's the one? Because even he turned it on her being are you trying to say that she's a suspect? It's no. But the fact of the matter is, that you didn't investigate this, look at her as a possible suspect, kind of is a little shady, don't you think? Because the fact of the matter is, it is proof that you didn't really look at Fernando. Basically, once again, and they had that whole conversation in the background of the episode where it's oh, jurors are supposed to come into this impartial. It's no juror is going to come into this situation impartial. It's that's impossible, because everyone's going to come in with their own bias of their own opinion of oh, where they currently stand on something. So I think it's kind of the same, in a similar vein in this case. It's just kind of oh, the cops came into this with everything kind of pointed towards Jonathan. So it's why kind of look anywhere else? It's you didn't even really look into Fernando too much, because if you did, it would take away focus. It make a conviction against Jonathan a little, because it may point to oh, you had multiple suspects, and then it might lean itself to be he could, Elena's husband could potentially be a suspect, so it could take away a little bit from the focus being on Jonathan being the only suspect. It does kind of change the perception of the case a bit. So that was an interesting element to the whole, thing. And obviously, Elena's husband getting up there on the stand, and obviously him being disgusted with Haley. She's I can't imagine what you're going to do. He's no. He was basically don't give me that bullshit. You're trying to make it seem like you care about me. You don't. The fact of the matter is, you're trying to say that I did it. But Haley, kept the ball rolling, being yeah, but did you know about your wife's affair? And it's he's at first, but it's you did find out, though. It's was your wife getting psychiatric help? are you getting psychiatric help? Kind of breaking it down by being like, because it's like, oh, your only alibi is your son. Your sleeping son was your alibi about like where you were at the time of the murder. So, and also it is a situation of like, this is his son. You know, it's like, your son will do anything to kind of, well, it's not a situation where because I think they're kind of suggesting like he was like half asleep, so like he wouldn't really, you know, it's not the best alibi, but it's also proof that like the cops, because even Haley had thrown it at the cop like, oh, like, did you, it's like, yeah, we questioned her, but questioning Grace, it's like, yeah, but did you read her Miranda rights? It's like, no, she wasn't a suspect. But the whole point is, once again, that is interesting. You're throwing your client's wife under the bus simply for the purpose of showing, it's meant to show, yeah, they didn't investigate all angles to this. Like, the fact is they didn't look into Grace that much, even though she was in the general area at the time. Yes, there was stuff that proved that, hey, she went other, but which is, I think is so fascinating, considering the fact is, when they were interviewing her, they were going at her so hard. But I guess, like, I guess Grace was just a means to an end. It's just kind of like, we're going after you, but truth be told is, we don't think you did. We think it's your husband. So they were, I guess that plays into, like, the whole tunnel vision thing. But, yeah, Haley was kind of riling up that courtroom with that whole, I mean, that was kind of her, like, once again, her whole point with this whole situation. There was a lot of interesting things, you know, in this, because obviously there's a whole situation of like, obviously Grace getting her father to come to the courtroom too, because it's like, you know, people are going to be looking at your reaction to this whole situation as well. And it's like, obviously for him, it's like, yes, I'm going to do this, but don't pretend like it's anything about like, this is for Henry's well-being. This is kind of just for, you know, to placate a lot of, you know, this is just mainly for his, this is mainly for Jonathan's defense. It's kind of what that whole, it's like, that's my main purpose here, but don't make it seem like this is in some shape or form for Henry. But the fact is, like, you know, things in this episode definitely seemed off, because it's actually interesting, because I think I want to say it was like one of the more recent episodes of the Joe Budden podcast. Obviously they were talking about this, like obviously throwing out their ideas. I think one of them had thrown out there, like basically thrown Henry's name out there, like maybe he might be the one responsible. I think one of them did, if I'm not mistaken. But because I started getting that feeling this episode, because I was like, that kid started feeling a little off, because we found out, oh, he knew about the affair, which is also sad, because, like, you know, Jonathan and Grace had that moment on the phone. It was actually kind of a cute moment. She went over. As far as we saw, they were making out, but it probably most likely led to something else, which is also complicated, because she went back home and she found Henry awake, and she's like, oh, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, because obviously he's worried about, like, you know, what this whole situation, well, for one, he was worried because he finally admits to his mom, I knew about the affair. If I told you, whoever it was that did it wouldn't have done it. Like, this is on me. It's like, no, your father should have never put you in that position. And obviously Grace got pissed at him, because it's like, here's another lie. It's like, this man cannot tell the truth to save his damn life. And it's just like, every time you turn around, he's telling lie after lie. It's like, why? Also, that is effed up to put your son in that situation where it's like, oh, he knew about the affair. It's like, they weren't doing anything, they were just kissing, but he smiled and waved at me like everything was okay. It's like, that was super fucked up. Like, how the hell are you going to be with your mistress and be like, oh, hey, son, like it's the most like natural thing in the world? That, I think right there was kind of explains some of the aspects about Jonathan, which we'll get into soon enough. But so there's that. And then there's the whole situation of like him later on, Henry at the restaurant being like, yeah, so can we get back together as a family? I was like, all right, I was like, I just couldn't help it. At that moment in the episode, I was like, all right, this kid, like, there's a part of me that I was like, maybe it's just, oh, he's a kid that wants his family back together and everything. But I'm like, I don't know, man, something seems off about this kid in this moment when he's just like, no, like when, you know, it's like, we can overcome anything, right? You know, even overcome this. You even say like when your clients, when it comes to an affair, like they can overcome even something, you know, something like cheating and end up stronger. And I'm just like, yeah, I get the perspective for that. At the same time, I was like, man, something just don't seem right about this kid in that moment. It's just the way he was pushing for it. And it was just kind of like, he was like, yeah, we're going to win. And that's where it started hitting me. I'm like, did he do it? Is this him being kind of like, oh, we get away with it? Like, this way dad doesn't, you know, get in trouble, and, you know, Miguel's dad kind of takes the fall for it. Or at the very least, it seemed like that might be the direction it was heading in. But as obviously, it's like, you know, maybe we can even get a dog and stuff. It's just like his whole energy, like his whole vibe just flipped, where you're just kind of like, I don't know, man. you felt a lot like you felt him being like feeling complicated and stuff like that. But it's like, which also says a lot too. The fact is that he was crying, or when he was like, "Oh, did you fucked her?" It's like you already knew, which is interesting. So that means you were playing it up in front of your mom because you already knew. You knew that your dad knew. So I think that speaks volumes. I don't know. But then it's like, oh, get a dog. You remember? His dad was like, what are you talking about? He's like, Mom told me that story. And immediately I was like, oh, did your mom lie? And he was like, she shouldn't have done that. And it turns out, because that story was bullshit, because the person that died was actually his little sister. He was responsible for her. She got out and she got hit by a car, which is like mad effed up. But I'm also like, he lied about the dog story. Could he be lying about this? Because obviously Grace was trying to contact her dad. She talked to her dad about it because she was trying to contact Jonathan's family, which we learned pretty early on, he's not in the best terms with his family, and it's like, oh, why isn't it? It's like, oh, because of this. This is the reason why. But obviously, her dad had a perspective of being like, so this type of trauma, as a therapist, what do you think it could represent itself as? Could it be just that basically saying that because of this trauma, he could never be capable of doing what he did? Or could he have swung the other way and turned into a sociopath because of the trauma of what he went through? So it's like, and Grace never gave her, opinion on the whole situation. But later on, Grace is able to get in contact with his mom. And immediately you're kind of like, oh, her mom's kind of because the moment it's like, oh, I haven't seen you since the wedding. I was like, oh, that's a long time. But also it's like, she's correcting her grammar. It's like, no, because of blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that's what? I'm like, why are you doing that? Don't be an asshole. I'm like, that's such a little nitpicky asshole thing to do. I'm like, oh, okay. But then she admits like, oh, we didn't cut ties with Jonathan. He cut ties with us. Like, the fact of the matter is, we were waiting for him to feel remorse. He didn't even say he was sorry. He was responsible, but it's like we tried to gather family around. It's like we tried to be there for him, but he didn't think of it a moment later. And you're like, okay. So now this plays into what I was talking about. That means, because obviously Jonathan made that whole point. He was putting on a show. That means he was putting on a show in front of Haley, like, oh yeah, I loved her. I mean, he's like, it's not that I didn't love my wife, it was different. But it's like the fact that you're crying and trying all this sob story. Because I even said it like last episode when he was on camera. Like obviously he's just like touching his ear and everything because it's almost like he's like, all right, time to cry. Yeah. That's why I'm like, so now you kind of understand like why he lies so much, because he's trying to make it seem like he's playing. Like, it's like, oh, how do I human? That's always kind of my catchphrase in situations like that, where it's like, I don't know how to be a normal human being. Fake it till you make it. So that's what it seems like it is. Like, he's just not really, so that kind of makes you question all his like times of like, oh, I love you, Grace. I mean, to be fair, it takes someone else to be like, oh, because let's not forget he had sex with his wife after he had sex with Elena. I think that was that was before she was found murdered, I think. I mean, I don't know if she had been murdered at that time by then. I don't think she had. Whatever the case may be, it's just like, I mean, to be fair, you can make the argument that's to alleviate his own guilt, and, which also begs the question is like, do you even feel any guilt over any? It brings his whole character into question to being like, I don't think, but then it makes you shift to go like, did he actually do it? It's like, I don't think he did it. He, once again, that other lawyer was like, yeah, your husband's a dick. I don't think he's the type of dick that would kill someone, but I think he's a dick, and it's like, I think this kind of, it's further proof of that. But I was like, dude. But then immediately after that whole conversation about him being a sociopath and her bringing it up to her friend, I was like, that means her son might be a sociopath too, right? Because I don't know if that's necessarily something on a genetic level. I don't know if that's necessarily hereditary, but I would assume, like, if you're a sociopath, your kid would most likely be one too. So I'm like, huh. And then she's cleaning up stuff. I'm like, you're going to find some evidence to prove that he did it. I don't know. I don't know what I expected. Bloody clothes or something. I didn't expect the damn murder weapon. I did not expect that. I was like, oh shit. And then the creepy thing of her looking up and his eyes being wide open. I'm like, oh. So now the question is, did he do it, Or because obviously he idolizes his dad so much, is he covering for his dad? Because obviously, once again, we brought it up. They made it clear earlier in the episode. He knew about the affair. And so for him, he made it clear. He was like, I want my family to be together and everything. So he'd probably kill Elena because it's like, oh, you're this homewrecker. You're destroying my family, you know? And just the whole thing about like, oh, did you know, Mom, did you know they were going to show that picture? Like I said, that whole scene at that restaurant or whatever, he seemed off, you know? So it makes you wonder, maybe that's why they kind of had the relationship they do, because Henry is so much like his dad. Maybe his dad recognizes it, or maybe his dad never did, which also complicates things too. Her as a therapist, it's like, once again, her family is her blind spot, because it's like, you're a therapist, you're kind of supposed to be able to read people to a certain extent, and you weren't able to read anything about your husband. Now you haven't been able, that means you also had a blind spot when it came to your son. So it's like, did he actually do it, or is he covering for your husband? I think he actually did it, but it's like, dude, that's going to be a rough situation, because it's like, as a mother, like, what do? Like, do you let someone else take the fall for it? Or are you going to, like, try to get your son the professional help he needs, potentially? Like, what's Henry's defense going to be? It's like, you know, because I think I didn't stick around because I don't want to see anything. I want to go into, I've fortunately going into this, aside from seeing the trailer, like, when it originally dropped, like, I have not, caught any previews of the next episodes, like, as the seasons progress, but I'm fairly certain this next episode is the finale. I could be completely wrong, because I think this is only 6 episodes from when I was looking up, but like I said, I could be wrong. So I think next episode is the finale. I'm like, how the hell is this all going to play out, dude? Because I think the next episode is called, like, The Truth or something like that, because I think I'd seen that, like, a while back, so I was like, oh, it's all going to come to a head there, and it sure as hell most likely is. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Because now it puts that whole conversation Henry said, like, if I had told you beforehand, maybe whoever did this, whoever was jealous, wouldn't have done, you know, it's like, it puts that in perspective of, like, maybe if he had told his mom ahead of time, maybe he wouldn't have been the one that killed Elena, or, you know, whatever, you know. So I do not know what, because of his age too, but also, you probably make the argument maybe, like, his environment created that situation too, just because I'm sure the argument could also be, like, what gets thrown at Jonathan, like, because of, like, the privileged situation, kind of like, well, you're in this rich situation, so you're never going to have to, like, suffer the ramifications for it. That might have also been another thing to it. It might have been maybe he found out that not only was his dad having an affair, it's also like, oh, you have another kid, so maybe that played into it too. I don't know what to make of that, dude. I mean, I know what to make of it, but I'm so curious to see where they take this next episode. Like I said, if it turns out to be the finale, which, like I said, I think I'm right, but I could be 100% wrong. But I'm so curious to see where this all takes us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.